Yeah, go ahead and mute your mic for me. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Making Learning Addictive. I am your host, Brian Romero Smith Sr. It is such a pleasure to once again get on the airwaves. Um, be it that you're with us live or on replay, or you catch us on a binge podcast later on, we welcome you and we thank you for watching and listening in. Tonight, we've got a great show for you. We've got a great special guest talking about something that is passionate in my household, considering I've got these gamers that are taking up all my bandwidth, right now. But we're going to talk a little bit about how to make esports equitable. It's a great conversation that we'll have with our special guest, and I'll introduce him to you in just a moment. But also remember that our guest that comes on to Making Learning Addictive during the week, we have a very special playlist that we have the conversation on to set the tone. And we'll go ahead and release that playlist directly after the show on both Apple Music, and on Spotify. Cool? All right, before we get things started, we do have some information that we want to share from Rethink Learning Conference or Summit coming up.
The Rethink Learning Summit is a 2-day virtual event to provide space for educators to pause, breathe, and reflect before we move forward. Join educators from around the world for 2 full days of both live learning events and on-demand sessions facilitated by a diverse group of lead learners. If ever there is a time for us to regroup and rethink, the time is now. Learn more and register at www.rethinklearningsummit.com.
Cool. And make sure you check out Rethink Learning Summit at rethinklearningsummit.com. That should be an excellent 2-day conference, virtually done, of course. And I will be debriefing each day to give us a chance to, kind of brain dump, everything we've learned from the day, because we rarely get those opportunities. So we'll go live at the end of each conference day just to have that great conversation about what took place from each of the presenters from that particular evening. All right, cool. Without further ado, I'd like to bring on to our show our special guest. Actually, can't even see him at the moment. Let me go ahead and bring him on. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome. Let me get his song ready for you. It's going to be diverse, y'all. I promise you. Check it out. Mr. Chris Aviles. What's up, Chris? You can unmute your mic now, man.
Brian, what's up, dude? Thank you for having me.
Oh, man, without a doubt. I'm actually very excited that you said yes. I appreciate that. I reached out, last minute asking you to join because I was excited about the article that I read from you. And I know you released it, earlier in the year, but, I'm always talking about esports around here, especially in this particular household. But you had a great article around esports and equity. Those two terms, not a lot of people put together on a regular basis. But before we jump in that conversation, let everybody know who you are and a little bit of something about you. Did you hear me?
Sorry, one more time.
I said, introduce yourself to the audience here.
Yeah, no worries. So my name is Chris Aviles. I am an educator at the Knollwood Middle School here in Fairhaven, New Jersey. I run a program called Fairhaven Innovates, where I use entrepreneurship to teach kids what I think are going to be important skills for them to master as they get older. On top of that, my program contains the first middle school esports team in the country. My students and we play Rocket League against all comers because when we first started, right, we say all comers. My first season 2 years ago consisted of playing all colleges because there were no middle schools to play. But I've been involved in the esports scene since 1998. I used to play competitive StarCraft for a long time, and then transitioned into CS:GO, Overwatch, and now Hearthstone. But on the other side of that, I've also played football and wrestled and did track as a high school athlete. I played rugby and wrestled in college. And then I have about 12 years varsity coaching football, wrestling, and track. So I feel like I have a foot in both worlds when it comes to esports, when it comes to traditional athletics. And a passion of mine has been merging the two, getting all the benefits out of both and trying to bring it to schools all over the country, especially here in New Jersey.
Yeah, that's dope. We go back a little ways, and I knew some of that about you. I still remember you greeting us every morning with "Hello, beautiful brown babies." You remember that? Do you remember that?
I do.
Regardless, so I knew about the sports background, but esports, for a lot of people, is still fairly new, and as COVID has dictated, our typical sports, they're no longer on TV. When the Michael Jordan documentary came on, everybody was super excited because there was some aspect of sports. But I started noticing esports being broadcasted.
Oh yeah.
A ton.
And did you notice the NBA put on their own esports
Yes,
season?
the 2K.
NASCAR.
Yep.
I mean, you're talking about every major network that had to fill sports programming filled it in some form with esports. I was reading something a couple of weeks ago. I think esports viewership is up something like 300%.
Wow.
So you're talking about, basically what I've been preaching for a while now, and that is esports is the athletics of remote learning. People really need to start wrapping their heads around the fact that esports can be, I would say, as beneficial to students as traditional sports, if not more. So I mean, it's something that the kids know is here, and I think educators and parents are starting to realize that not only is this a very serious consideration to put into schools for many reasons, but if we're serious about careers and where the jobs are going to be, especially we're always preaching STEM jobs, STEM jobs, STEM jobs.
Right.
This is the fastest growing industry in the world.
Right.
And so when we talk about these STEM jobs, this is a good chance where these kids are going to end up.
Right. Now, you mentioned a lot of that in the article, and ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know where that article is, we'll point to it at the end of the show. But all you have to do is go to techedupteacher.com. And you can also see that information that we'll refer to this evening. But, Chris, we were talking prior to this, and I let you know that, back in the day, I had a little startup that was a gaming company. And basically what we did was we took, the games. Well, we tried to solve a problem first. Parents were complaining that the kids were playing too many video games, right? Regardless of what the research said, in regards to problem-solving capabilities and the brain synapses and everything firing, all this stuff, brain research about gaming, parents didn't understand this, right? Mm-hmm. So we began the company to take away the academic aspect of gaming and try to provide lessons that the parents could use to create conversations around gaming with their kids, to apply the learning that's taking place and match it up to what's going on in the classroom. But we stopped because my own kids said I was making the gaming boring, for them.
Chocolate covered broccoli.
Right. So what do you tell parents who have that bane? We know esports is here and it's not going anywhere.
Right.
What do you tell the parents who have that particular bane?
So, I mean, I think what it comes down to is this idea of chocolate covered broccoli, right? A lot of times we will take something that kids love and we will try to smash learning into it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times that learning is passive. And I think that's where the confusion comes, right? I think when people talk about screen time, when they talk about esports and video games and stuff like that, it comes down to producer versus consumer, right?
Right.
Are they making something or are they just consuming the game? And so I'll look at, what I think is going to be one of the biggest surprise hits in the esports scene when it comes to education is Minecraft.
Mm-hmm.
right? Minecraft is a game that it's you're a producer, right? You're making things, you're thinking, you're building, and then if you start to see what you can incorporate when it comes to coding and STEM and all these different things, I think it comes down to what is your kid doing, right? What is your kid doing with the video games? And so when it comes to esports, the game, it's not just about the game, right? When it comes to esports, anything that you could get out of traditional athletics, right? I call it TLC, teamwork, leadership, communication,
Nice.
can all be learned through esports. And so I think it's when you have a well-run esports program, kids aren't just playing the games, they're learning to communicate, they're learning to work as a team, overcoming adversity and all that good stuff.
As you can see in the background, that's my Minecraft gamer right here.
There you go.
We're talking a little bit about it, Ed, and you're right. You're good. Let me go ahead and finish the show though. and you're right. I am amazed at. Okay, so first of all, my thumbs don't move as fast as my kids do,
Right.
but I'm amazed at all the problem solving that goes on inside of Minecraft.
Right.
I like the idea that they're producers versus consumers, for the most part. But once again, I have to explain that to parents. All they look at is the time that's spent in there.
Right.
What are ways that kids though can actually demo what is they're doing for parents? That makes sense. What I'm
Yeah,
asking.
no, I mean, I think before anything, what I always encourage parents to do is sit down and play
Right.
with your kid, play the game, experience what they're experiencing, slap on the headset. And I think that you're going to realize what they're doing, right, is a little bit more meaningful than maybe parents think.
Yeah.
And I'll also bring up the opposite. Be really careful as a parent, because I think a lot of times parents dismiss video games as something meaningful to students, right? I had a conversation with a parent not too long ago who was on, the kids on my esports team, and they told me that before esports, that parent felt that the relationships that
Mhm.
her kid was building online with his gaming group weren't as meaningful as the relationships that he had in real life. And I think that's
Wow.
right. A way to think about it is that your kids are building meaningful relationships, even though they've never met in person. And you and I active on Twitter. Think about how many relationships of people we care about that we've met that we have never met in person or rarely see.
Absolutely.
Right.
Uh-huh.
So there's a big social community aspect of gaming. And you have to be really careful as a parent that when you're putting down, especially a kid who identifies as a gamer, who is a kid who probably makes that a big part of their personality, you're dismissing a very large part of their life, and
Yeah.
there's going to be pushback on that. And so before I think a parent is, dismissive, I think they really just need to play and get into it, join the team with the kid, play Overwatch with them, get on the Rocket League with them, and just see, even if you're bad, like you said, our thumbs are slowing down these days. I moved to Hearthstone because now Hearthstone is a thinking game, right?
Right.
It's not an action game. So I could be as competitive, with one hand while I hold my son, because I can still, keep up. But I think kids need to be willing to reach out to their parents, ask them to be part of it. And I think parents need to be receptive or even take that role on themselves and ask.
Yeah, I think it's actually a great relationship builder.
Oh, it's the best.
You
ever want your kid's face to light up? Ask them to show you how to play Minecraft.
absolutely.
Ask them if you can play Overwatch with them or something like that. It's the best.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the other thing I tell parents is, well, you bought the console.
Yeah.
You bought it, but that brings up the accessibility
Right.
of these games. We know how accessible it is. Even our company put an app on Xbox, because if you didn't have a laptop, there was a great chance that you actually had an Xbox system instead. But how does that accessibility lead into the equity aspect of esports?
Right. So let's break it down into two parts, because when we talk about accessibility, I think we need to put it into two columns. Number one, as somebody again who has a background in traditional sports, right? My sport has been wrestling. I've wrestled for 26 years. It's the greatest sport on earth. Wrestling is the most accessible traditional sport there is. I've coached deaf students, I've coached blind
Wow.
students, I've coached students missing limbs, I've coached kids with Down syndrome on my team, I've had kids who have cerebral palsy, right? And they can participate in that sport to some level. And I would
Wow.
say, right, wrestling is the most accessible. Esports is way more accessible than even wrestling. So when we're talking about accessibility, we need to understand that not only can basically every kid participate in esports, right? Whether it's even just using the Microsoft controller. If you've ever seen the controller that they put out, the
Hmm.
Adaptive controller,
Right.
right? That
Hmm.
allows all kinds of special beings to be able to
Right.
participate. Um, we also have to remember the kids that are likely going to be drawn into esports are probably our underserved kids, right? There's data out there that Black students gain more than white students, that Hispanic students gain more than white students. 65% of LGBTQ youth identify themselves as gamers.
Hmm.
You're talking about just all of these different, however you want to silo and tag these kids or people who play games, right? This is something that's really attractive to a large swath of kids. And I can tell you personally from, I have 20 kids on my team. I have kids on the spectrum. I have kids with IEPs. I have kids with 504s. I have kids who are not physically big enough to play other sports,
Mm.
right? But they
Right.
can find a home
Right.
on the esports team that never existed in school for them before, right?
Hmm.
And so when we talk about accessibility, I think number one, we need to realize that esports is probably the most accessible, competitive based thing that we can bring into our school. Now, the other issue of accessibility is exactly what you're talking about. When you talk about the games, or you're talking about the consoles, or you're talking about all that kind of stuff. And for me, I got to approach it a couple different ways. Number one, you see a lot of companies now selling their stuff, and everybody's pitching their rigs, and everybody,
Right.
and then on top of that, you have the for-profit esports organizations.
Hmm.
I think that would be a great role for the for-profit company. So when Microsoft and Dell, they're pitching their equipment to you, I really hope that they have some type of equity plan. They have some type of give back program, even if it's something just like gift cards, right? Because a lot of schools, again, with equity, they can't get equipment into their schools,
Right.
or even the accounts to play the game, because people like Steam don't take POs from school.
Right.
Right. So, but the way we circumvent that is we get gift cards. We could buy Steam gift cards through PO, or a lot of time they come from CTAs and stuff like that. So there is a tech equity issue in esports. There are a lot of ways to chip away at it, but that I think is going to need to have, something bigger than us, at least eventually. I had mentioned that I started the first middle school esports team in the country. And I was eventually able to convince, Steve Isaacs was the first guy I brought. He had a game club. I said, dude, can you put together a Rocket League team and let's play? And so that, was the first middle school we played was, Steve Isaacs. If you don't know him, follow him. He's wonderful. But from there, I wound up onboarding personally 38 teams from across the country and put them in this middle school esports league I made.
Wow.
Almost all of their teams were run by students who brought their Xbox in from home.
Right.
And so we were doing bring your own device esports leagues. And so, I think part of it, for better or for worse, comes down to this idea that teachers have done so much for so long with so little that we could basically do anything with nothing.
That's how we roll. You're right. That is how we've always rolled.
And so, run, especially now with crossplay, and one of the reasons I always recommend Rocket League is it's a great crossplay. You can have your kid bring in the Xbox, convince your IT to unblock it, and I'm helping teams from around the country run their esports programs basically for free. So there are ways. Another thing you could do is, the way I got the laptops I use for my esports team is I also use them during the day for my STEM class, right? For my entrepreneurship class. Okay. So we're doing video editing, graphic design, 3D modeling, CAD. We're doing all that stuff during the day. But then when it's time for esports practice, they magically transform into the esports laptops. So if you have a program like that, or if you can, we have a wonderful woman here in New Jersey named Sandy Paul. And Sandy Paul, as far as I'm aware, is the first person to be able to have her esports team funded by Title I money.
What?
And so I'm working with her, right, to put together what that looked like. Because Title One, right, if you can, so you go back to even what we had mentioned before, how can you make parents better
Yeah.
understand gaming, right? So they put out a study, and of course I can't remember who did it, but basically it turned out that of high school esports players that they surveyed, 55% plan to go major in a STEM career in college.
Hmm.
So you can also, right, work in a STEM curriculum on top of a bunch of other curriculums,
Brilliant.
right? So my esports team, we have a book club curriculum. We have a STEM and career and technical education curriculum. We have a social emotional learning curriculum that tackles not only teamwork, leadership, and communication, but also touches on health and wellness and how to be physically and mentally healthy as a gamer. And then I think what makes the curriculum we use super special is we also tackle hate speech and bias. So
Mm.
we do a lot of things to address the sometimes toxic natures of gaming communities. So we're talking about tackling things like homophobia, misogyny, racism, right, in these communities. Because if we can catch our kids young, it's
Amen.
we can help diffuse that.
Right.
um, and so I think when you talk about accessibility, if you pitch the esports program as a whole student program, then maybe they find a little money in Title One. Maybe they find a little money to take those STEM laptops, or maybe then they're more likely to allow the Xbox onto the network. So I think that's some of the best things that we can do as educators is make the case that esports isn't just playing video games. It's
Yeah.
careers, it's social emotional learning. It re-engages. I've had a lot of kids become re-engaged in learning because I tie attendance and GPA to being part of my team. My kids know if they're not doing what they're
That's
supposed to be doing in the
motivation right
classroom,
there.
yeah, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing in the classroom. They
Hmm.
get benched. If they get benched for long enough, they get dismissed and they can come back when their grades are back up. So I think when you make the case that one, esports is accessible and draws a number of students that maybe are underserved or don't have a homeschool connection, and then you say, accessibility wise, here's why we should get the equipment, here's why you should budget for us in Title One, here's why you should allow Joey to bring his Xbox or Jane to bring her Xbox in so we can all play together. I think that right now is the best we could do, unfortunately. um, you know
Yeah. See, you and I get it. I'm just going to be real. The unfortunate part is those who are making those decisions, who pull those triggers,
yeah,
oftentimes don't.
right,
You know, they're not doing the research. That their mind is, just to be fair, on a lot
right,
of things, especially right now.
yeah,
With our current, COVID-19 situation,
right,
and racial injustice issues going on, and how do they approach that? Is it? You mentioned a lot of things to where those questions and those ways of teaching kids can be embedded within esports itself.
100%.
You know,
What it comes down to is a lot of time these educators or decision makers in districts, when they're thinking about esports, if they can start to wrap their head around about having a team, the first thing they want to talk about is devices.
right,
And that's the last thing you should
right,
be talking about. You should be talking about how you're going to build an anti-racism curriculum into your esports team, because, I've had to break down, my kids were sharing racist or homophobic memes, and
mm,
that, they're middle schoolers. They didn't know any better, right? But when I had to explain to them, look, guys, this is why what you're saying or the video you're watching or what you're sharing, this is where it comes from, right? I spent a lot of time breaking that stuff down. Because surprisingly, the other thing is a lot of your kids who join esports teams are going to be kind of those tech savvy kids.
right,
And I'll tell you, my sixth, seventh, and eighth graders, they have found themselves on places in the internet that they should be afraid to be, right? They found themselves in places like 4chan, the Donald subreddit when it used to exist, and they got to be real careful because it's not a big leap to be young and in those spaces
mm-hmm,
identify, or being unable to identify misogyny when they disguise it as men's rights, and then bring that into part of your personality. And so I think, and Steve, who I partner with on a lot of stuff, what I love about Steve Isaacs, he does a great job talking about how if there's this stereotype about gamers being in the basement and being alone, the best thing we could do is bring it into schools, make it educational, role model for them
I
what
love,
interacting
I
in a
love
video
that.
game looks like, role model for them, right, what interacting on the internet looks like. Because I think right? We get
Yeah.
it. I have a 1 month or 1 month. I have a year-old son. It's one thing to have your kids go and watch TV on their own. It's a
Uh-huh.
whole nother thing to leave your kid alone on the internet.
Hey, man, you're
You know what I
right.
mean?
Uh-huh.
The internet is the single best and worst invention in human history.
Yeah.
You know,
Indeed.
and so I think that's a big part of what an esports program needs to be, educating the whole student. I'll even tell you another highlight of what I think makes a successful program that I do. We're talking about these careers. When my kids come in and they want to, come to practice, they don't want a 45-minute, presentation on what marketing is in esports. They don't even really want to hear from somebody in the industry. I remember I got some speakers and they were just glazed over because they want to just play the game. They want to
Mm.
compete. But what I realized and what I started to do is I don't do anything for my kids, right? And so it sounds bad, but here's what that means.
Mm-hmm.
They want to have an event. They want to have people come watch us play, another school. They got to go to the
Yeah.
superintendent, sign out the
That's it.
space. They got to do the marketing. They run the social media. They got to moderate the Twitch chat.
Love it.
They got to set up all the Twitch bots. So my kids are getting hands-on experience in the esports and related industries.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it needs to look like,
Yep.
And so now when you present an esports team that does all those things, I have a book club lined up for my kids. We're starting with The Art of War by Sun Tzu.
Yeah.
And so every day we're going to talk a little bit about that book and how it relates to esports and life. And
Dope.
right, it's all just like when I used to coach wrestling, man. I used to have 5-10 minutes when all the kids were at the end of practice are huffing and puffing because I used to make them sprint. We used to sprint until the ceiling sweated. And so when they were all sitting, right, that's when we talked about what it meant to be, an upstanding young man or an upstanding young woman. That's when it meant, that's when we got to that stuff. And I think as a coach, my mission was always to get my men and women that I coach to leave better people. That's what an esports program needs to be.
Man, I absolutely love it. Love it, love it. I mean, I've always loved everything you do, but I actually didn't see all of the esports, from you. Of course, you get busy, get into your own thing, but man, you've made some serious waves. I understand that you've got something massive coming up.
Yeah. So what I'm really excited about, Steve Isaacs and I founded a nonprofit called Garden State Esports. We are the NASEF affiliate for New Jersey. And if you're not familiar with NASEF, you want to check them out. It's North American Scholastic Esports Federation. They, in my eyes, are the only organization, the only nonprofit on a national level that's doing it right. They are to high school and middle school and eventually elementary school esports what the NCAA is to college, in a good way. And that means that they're student first, they're overseeing, they're setting up what things should look like, they're running leagues. And so they're getting so big, NASEF, they just brought on the UK, they just brought in Japan, they're just brought in schools and teams from Mexico, that they are having and helping affiliates start who can help spread their message. And so Steve and I are the only nonprofit in New Jersey whose mission it is to bring esports to every school in New Jersey, all 558 school districts. We want to help them start esports teams. We want to run the league. We want to set the rules. We want to have in-person state finals and just make sure all of the education, all of the value, all of the learning, we want to make sure that schools know how to set up safe spaces, that they're inclusive, that they're diverse, and we're tackling those hard problems that we're seeing in the gaming community. So Garden State Esports has been my side project now for about the last year. We recently launched a few weeks ago, and we're trying to get every school in New Jersey to jump on board and really make waves in esports for the Garden State. And the nice thing, even if you're not from New Jersey or in New Jersey, because we all know not everybody's perfect, right? You can't all be from New Jersey.
See now, what else? What else, man?
You still go to gsesports.org. We are publishing our curriculums. We're doing like our stakeholder packets, how to introduce this to your board. We're putting the presentations together for you to show parents. We're giving it all away for free, even if you're not from NJ.
That's beautiful. That's how you make it equitable.
That's it.
As well. Oh man, Chris. And I know we ran out of the playlist. I did it my way on there twice. When you paying attention, you just rolling and didn't even know it. And I appreciate you doing it your way because that's actually what's going to help each and every learner. and to me that's extremely important. Man, I wish we had more time because we can actually talk about this all day. Actually, I have further questions, and I know people online have questions.
Yeah, man. We'll do a part 2 one day.
All right, part 2 sounds good. So, how else can people get in contact with you if they have their own questions they want to ask?
Yeah, I'm Teched Up Teacher, Teched Up Teacher, everywhere on social media. That's the website. And if you want to dive into what we're starting to post when it comes to esports and bringing it to your school, even if you're not from New Jersey, check out gsesports.org. And there you'll find all the resources that we're posting and getting up and running. Otherwise, if you have any questions, I love talking about esports. I'll do it all day. So please don't hesitate to reach out, email me. I'm happy to help you onboard, convince your district, prove to your district that esports is a valuable tool to help students learn.
Absolutely love it. Ladies and gentlemen, you can actually see that at the bottom of the screen at Teched Up Teacher. That's the same as the website as well. Make sure you reach out to Chris. A wealth of information and a lot of ways that you can actually make esports equitable because it's going to happen regardless, whether you like it or not. So let's go ahead and get on board with this and meet our kids where they are. That's the most important piece, about it all. Once again, my man, I appreciate you joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you got something out of this as well. Make sure you stay tuned. We're not going to do a Thursday show, but we'll do our Sunday R&B show and our gospel brunch as well. And then we'll have some special guests next week that we'll promote on Twitter later on. Once again, you guys, thank you for joining us. We appreciate everything that you do for our community to help make learning addictive for our kids. And we'll see y'all real soon. Peace.